The sirens weren't the loudest thing that night. It was the sound of injustice, raw and unfiltered, when a uniform meant to protect became a weapon of hate. The evening heat clung to the air like a damp blanket, pressing against the cracked sidewalks of Brooksville. It was late enough that the sun had dipped below the rooftops, but the streets still glowed with the day's leftover warmth. 17-year-old Maya Jackson walked with her backpack hanging loosely over one shoulder, her basketball shoes squeaking slightly on the pavement with each step. Sweat cooled on her forehead after 2 hours of drills at the community gym, and the rhythm of her music muffled through her earbuds kept her company. She was thinking about dinner, maybe leftover pasta, and the fact that she still had homework to finish. The streets were quiet, except for the occasional car passing by, its headlights cutting through the golden dusk. She didn't notice the police cruiser until she heard the low hum of its engine behind her. It slowed, the tires crunching lightly. Against the edge of the curb, Maya's shoulders tensed. In Brooksville, you didn't ignore a police car that lingered behind you, not if you were young, black, and walking alone at night. She pulled one earbud out and glanced back. A tall, broad-shouldered officer stepped out of the vehicle. His hair was close-cropped, his uniform pressed crisp against his frame. The name tag read Grant. His eyes narrowed as if he'd found something suspicious, or maybe he'd already decided she was suspicious. Where you headed? His voice was sharp, the kind that didn't sound like a question but an order. Home, Maya said, careful to keep her tone polite. She'd been taught to answer police quickly and respectfully, her father's rule, drilled into her since she was a kid just coming from basketball practice. Grant's gaze swept over her, from her sneakers to the scuffed backpack slung over her shoulder. Out late for a school night, aren't you? He said, stepping closer. It's only 8:30, she replied softly, trying not to sound defensive. She took a small step back, but he closed the distance. You match the description of someone we're looking for, he said flatly. Maya frowned. What description? Don't play smart, he snapped. His hand moved to his belt, fingers brushing over the radio. Got ID on you. She started to unzip her backpack, but before she could reach inside, his hand shot out and gripped her arm. It wasn't gentle. Maya's breath hitched as his fingers dug into her skin. Keep your hands where I can see them, he barked. Put the bag down. Her pulse quickened. I'm just trying to get my wallet bag down now. His tone carried no room for argument. She set the backpack on the ground. Grant grabbed it, unzipped it roughly, and dumped the contents onto the sidewalk. Books, a half-empty water bottle, a crumpled jersey, and her phone spilled out. He crouched, flipping through her things like he was searching for something he already believed was there. A car rolled slowly past, driver slowing to see what was happening. Through the glass, Maya caught sight of a phone lifted, someone recording. For a second, she felt a flicker of hope, but Grant noticed too. His jaw tightened, and he yanked her by the arm toward the hood of his cruiser. Her palms hit the metal, still warm from the day's heat. You resisting? He asked, his voice low, almost taunting. No, she said quickly, her voice trembling. I haven't done anything. Then stop moving. He twisted her wrists and she bit back a cry. Her mind raced, heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the faint hum of the cruiser's engine. She thought of her father, his calm voice, his steady eyes. She wanted to call him, but her phone lay on the pavement behind them. The street felt painfully quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound sharp: the click of metal handcuffs, the creak of leather on his belt, the faint buzz of a streetlight overhead. And for the first time that night, fear began to outweigh her confusion. Something told her this wasn't going to end quickly. The cruiser's interior smelled faintly of old coffee and something metallic, like dried blood or rust. The vinyl seat was sticky against Maya's legs as she shifted uncomfortably, her wrists pinched by the cold steel cuffs. Officer Grant slammed the door behind her without a word, the sharp sound making her flinch. Through the window, she could see her backpack and belongings scattered on the pavement. He didn't bother picking them up. Instead, he climbed into the driver's seat, the weight of his body causing the car to dip slightly. He turned the ignition, and the hum of the engine filled the air, drowning out the faint chirp of crickets outside. Maya stared at the back of his head, the buzzed hairline sharp against the dim glow of the dashboard. Her breathing was shallow, her chest tight. She wanted to speak, to explain again that she was just coming from practice, that he was making a mistake, but something in his rigid posture warned her to stay quiet. The cruiser pulled away from the curb, the sudden movement jerking her slightly forward. Her heart sank as the familiar streets rolled past the window, each passing block taking her farther from home. A few minutes later, Grant reached for the radio clipped to his vest. Unit 4-1 en route to station with a female suspect matching the earlier Bolo, he said, his voice clipped and official, as if rehearsed. Bolo, be on the lookout. The word sent a chill through Maya. She knew what that meant on paper, but in this moment it felt like a lie wrapped in authority. Suspect. The word slipped out before she could stop herself. Quiet, he barked without turning around. She pressed her lips together, her mind racing. She needed to call her father, but her phone was still on the street, probably in the hands of the bystander who'd been recording. Maybe that was a good thing. Maybe someone was already calling for help. She clung to that fragile thought like a lifeline. When they reached the station, the harsh white light from the entrance spilled across the cruiser's hood. Grant yanked open her door and pulled her out, his grip firm enough to make her stumble. The lobby smelled of bleach and old paper. Behind the front desk sat a woman in a navy uniform, her eyes flicking between Grant and Maya with a quick, unreadable glance. "Processing?" she asked. "Yeah," Grant replied. "Possible theft suspect matches the description." His tone was so casual, so certain, that it made Maya's stomach twist. There was no mention of evidence, no acknowledgement that she'd been cooperative, just a label thrown over her like a heavy coat she didn't ask to wear. They led her to a small, windowless room. The walls were a dull gray, and the table in the center was scarred with years of scratches. Grant uncuffed her only to chain her to a metal ring bolted to the table. "Wait here," he ordered, leaving without another word. The moment the door closed, the room felt smaller, the air heavier. She could hear her own heartbeat in the quiet. Minutes dragged by, though it was impossible to tell how many. Finally, the door creaked open, and a different officer entered, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a lined face. He carried a clipboard and a bottle of water. "You thirsty?" he asked, setting the bottle down in front of her. She hesitated, then nodded. "Can I make a phone call?" Her voice cracked slightly, but she tried to keep it steady. He glanced toward the door, then back at her. "You'll get your call." His tone was softer than Grant's, but guarded, as if he knew something was off and couldn't say it aloud when he left. She twisted the bottle cap and took a slow sip, the cool water washing away the dryness in her mouth but not the knot in her stomach. She thought about her father, about how he always told her to stay calm and trust the system, but the system right now felt like a locked room with no windows. The metal chain rattled faintly as she shifted in her seat, staring at the closed door. She didn't know how long it would be before she saw him again. But she knew one thing for certain. Once her father found out what had happened tonight, Officer Grant's smug confidence was going to crack wide open. The sound of the door unlocking snapped Maya's head up. The hinges creaked, and Officer Grant stepped in, his expression unreadable except for the faint curl of a smirk at the corner of his mouth. "Time for your call," he said, tossing a landline phone onto the table. The cord swung like a pendulum before it settled. Maya's hands trembled as she reached for it, but she didn't waste time. She punched in the number she knew better than her own heartbeat. The first ring barely finished before her father answered. "Maya, what's wrong?" His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent, an edge so sharp it could cut steel. "Dad," her voice cracked and she swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay steady. "I'm at the Brooksville station. An officer stopped me on the way home. He said I matched some description, but she didn't get to finish. Stay where you are. Don't say another word to anyone. I'm on my way." The line went dead, leaving only the hollow dial tone. Grant gave a small snort. "Daddy to the rescue, huh?" He picked up the phone and set it back in its cradle, clearly amused. But Maya caught the faint twitch in his jaw, a sign he wasn't as confident as he wanted to seem. The minutes that followed were tense, the silence in the room broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then, somewhere beyond the walls, a new sound rose, sharp, deliberate footsteps echoing down the hallway. The air in the room seemed to shift. Grant straightened slightly, his smirk fading. The door opened, and Judge Anthony Jackson filled the doorway. He was a tall man, with a frame that carried authority effortlessly, dressed in a dark suit that seemed untouched by the humid night outside. His eyes swept the room in a single glance, landing first on his daughter, then on the officer standing beside her. "Uncuff her," Judge Jackson said. His voice was low, but carried the weight of an order no one in the building could mistake. Grant hesitated. "Sir, she's still under now." The word cracked through the air like a whip. For a moment, neither man moved. Then grudgingly, Grant pulled the keys from his belt and freed Maya's wrist from the cold metal. She rubbed the red marks on her skin, her father's eyes softening briefly as he took them in before hardening again when he turned back to Grant. "On what grounds was my daughter detained?" Jackson asked. His tone was controlled, but the pressure behind it was unmistakable. "Matches the description of a suspect from earlier," Grant replied. His words clipped. Jackson's gaze didn't waver. "What description?" Grant shifted, his shoulders tightening. "Young black female, late teens, athletic build, which is to say, half the basketball team from the high school." Jackson interrupted, his voice cutting clean through Grant's attempt at justification. "Did you have probable cause beyond the color of her skin and the fact that she was walking home?" Grant's mouth opened, but no answer came out. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Behind them, the station's desk sergeant appeared, clearly uneasy. "Judge Jackson, maybe we should step into my office." "No," Jackson said, his eyes still locked on Grant. "We'll handle this right here." The bystander's recording, as it turned out, had already made its way to the station. The sergeant, pale and tight-lipped, handed Jackson a tablet. The video showed everything: Grant pulling over, dumping Maya's bag, grabbing her, shoving her against the car. No signs of resistance. No reason for arrest. Jackson set the tablet down slowly, his expression unreadable. "Officer Grant, this town has tolerated far too much for far too long. Tonight, that ends. Grant's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. The room felt smaller, the fluorescent hum suddenly louder, and for the first time since the night began, Maya saw something in Grant's face she hadn't before: fear. The courthouse was packed. Word of what happened had spread through Brooksville like wildfire, carried by the recording that had been shared hundreds of times overnight. Reporters clustered outside the front steps, their cameras flashing with every arrival. Inside, the air buzzed with quiet tension, neighbors, activists, and curious townsfolk filling every seat, their eyes fixed on the proceedings. Maya sat beside her father at the front, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, but her father's calm presence anchored her in place. When the judge, this time not her father, entered, the room fell silent. Officer Grant sat across the aisle, his uniform replaced by a plain suit. The confident smirk from that night was gone, replaced by a stiff, guarded expression. His lawyer leaned in occasionally to whisper, but Grant kept his eyes forward, avoiding Maya's gaze. The prosecution wasted no time. They played the full video on a large screen, the audio sharp and clear. Every word, every shove, every false accusation echoed through the chamber. There were audible gasps when Grant's voice barked, "You resisting?" as he shoved Maya against the hood. Some in the audience shook their heads. Others murmured in disbelief. Witness after witness took the stand: the man who had filmed the encounter, the neighbor who had seen Grant dump Maya's bag, even the officer who had quietly given her water in the holding room. Each account layered another piece onto the picture: a young woman targeted without cause, and an officer who let his bias drive his actions. When Maya was called to testify, her legs felt heavy as she walked to the stand. She told her story simply, without exaggeration, her voice steady even when describing the fear she'd felt. She looked directly at the jury, not at Grant. "I kept thinking, if my father wasn't who he is, would I have even made it to the station alive?" she said. The room was still, the weight of her words settling like stone. The defense tried to frame the stop as a misunderstanding, claiming Grant had been acting on incomplete information. But the video, the testimony, and Grant's own inability to justify his actions under cross-examination made the argument crumbled up by the afternoon. The verdict came: guilty on charges of unlawful detention, abuse of authority, and falsifying a police report. The sentence was swift termination from the force and a year in county jail. Grant's face was pale as he was led away, his eyes flicking toward Maya for the first time but finding no forgiveness there. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted not in celebration, but in a murmur of relief. Maya stood beside her father as microphones and questions crowded in. Judge Jackson spoke for them both. "This is not just about my daughter," he said, his voice carrying across the steps. "It's about the principle that no one is above the law." That night, back home, Maya sat in her room, the faint sounds of the town drifting through her open window. She thought of how quickly an ordinary walk home had turned into something that would follow her forever. But she also thought of the faces in the courtroom, the truth laid bare, and the fact that for once justice hadn't been a promise, it had been delivered. If you want, I can also compile all 4 chapters into one continuous story so it reads like a short novel that would make it flow seamlessly from start to finish. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to The Black Struggle for more powerful stories that deserve to be heard.